And live. Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World. I'm delighted to be joined by Dawn Harpster, Senior Conversation Architect, Talkdesk. Dawn, how you doing? Oh, we lost. Have
Yeah,
we lost? Have we
there we
lost
go.
signal already? Oh,
That
you're
was
back.
weird. Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, it froze. Hi, everyone.
This was doing this last time, you know. This was I was having some really dodgy situations with this program last time. We had a very similar situation, so hopefully the recording's okay. But you can hear me though, John, can you?
I can hear you. Yep.
Cool, perfect, perfect, perfect. Good, good. Cool. Well, thank you for joining us. Appreciate you spending the time in Nebraska. Are you?
That is correct. Yes, and thank you for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
Nice one. Yeah, appreciate it. It's going to be good. I'm looking forward to this because, yeah, Talkdesk is a very interesting company. One of those companies that has been, I suppose Talkdesk has been working on conversational AI for quite a while, right?
Well, I've only been with the company since January of 2021. Yeah, so a little over a year.
Yeah.
And yeah, I couldn't resist when Ben Rigby interviewed me. I was immediately enamored of him and of the company and couldn't wait to jump on board and work for Talkdesk.
Nice, nice one, nice one. Cool. Well, we'll get into that a bit more. But first, before we do that, I want to give a quick update to the folks tuning in at home or wherever you are. That VUX World will be at Project Voice, not Project Voice, Voice Summit rather, in October. It's creeping up now. It's in about 8 weeks' time. VUX at Voice 22, presented by Core AI, and we're going to be covering the end-to-end story of contact center automation. So, if any of you are looking at ways in which you can automate your call center, automate your contact center, automate your customer experience. We've got a whole day's worth of content planned. We've got a stage to ourselves. We've got a room to ourselves. Going to be 150 professionals and business leaders in that room and learning the tricks of the trade, the ins and outs, the challenges, the insights, and everything you need to be able to set up a project, launch a conversational AI solution, and scale that throughout the enterprise. So I'm hugely looking forward to that. It's the first in-person VUX World event that we've done yet. We did have one planned in 2020, obviously for obvious reasons. That didn't happen. So it's happening in October in Arlington, and it's going to be absolutely immense. So go to www.voicesummit.ai for more information and for ideas and pricing on tickets and things like that. Looking forward to seeing you there. Cool. So yeah, looking forward to that. So back to yourself, Dawn, and Talkdesk. You said you started Talkdesk in 2021. Did you say?
That's correct. Yes.
So what were you doing before Talkdesk?
Well, I was doing the same thing at another company.
Yeah, you got a lot of experience in conversation design.
I have a lot of experience and I don't want to do the math. It's been that long. Yeah, been around, seen some things, seen some trends come and go, and it's interesting when they start repeating when those
Interesting.
trends come back
Nice.
around again, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember this from last time.
Right.
Yeah.
What trends have you noticed repeating lately?
Well, actually, the persona trend. Okay,
Right.
so persona trend, there was a time back in, when the majority of voice applications were IVR. And all of a sudden, everybody decided they needed a persona, and now we're coming back to that, which is interesting to observe from this vantage
Yeah.
point.
Interesting. So it's an interesting one, that isn't it? Because so for those of you that subscribe to the LinkedIn newsletter, Conversational AI and NLP, just visit my profile. It's linked there if you don't already, or the VUX World newsletter. Or if you visit the VUX World website frequently, you'll have seen the post that yourself, Dawn, and Ben McCulloch on our team put together, which
Mhm.
was really interesting and refreshing because one of the things that me and Ben were talking about during the process of putting together that article was how it's become almost like a default in the conversation design community that
Mhm.
the very first thing that you should do when you're designing a conversation is to create a personality or a persona.
Mhm.
And it's almost like it's a given that that's what you do. Every training course that I've done over the years, it's in there. The training actually that I've given to others, it's been a part of it. And so it's almost this like default behavior that no one's really challenging or questioning. Um, and so it was really interesting to hear a bit more about your approach on that,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of stuff I think that goes into these personas that can be a little bit like fluff, a bit unnecessary.
Right.
And so a lot of the stuff that you were saying was really resonating with me. So I'm wondering whether you can share, for those that haven't read the piece, a little bit about your philosophy on persona or personality design.
Sure. And my philosophy is it's pretty simple here. The user is the most important. The user is the most important actor in a VA that you're producing, not the persona. And I feel like there a lot more emphasis is put on a persona than on the user, to the detriment of the VA and to the detriment of the user. Um, you know, you don't really need to have a persona to have a good VA. You need to have good writing to have a VA, in my opinion. Good writing, good intent training, phrase training, all of that. All of that's part of it, right? But I find that a lot of times way too much focus is put on a persona, when in actuality the user just wants to get some business done. Specifically if your VA is something transactional, if your users are coming to you to complete a piece of business, a persona might impede that, right? If you're putting too much emphasis on the persona. It's one thing, and I use this example, Surfer Boy Pizza. I don't know if you're a Stranger Things fan, but Stranger Things has Surfer Boy Pizza, and there's actually a phone number you can call to get to
Nice.
Surfer Boy Pizza, and it's clever and it's fun, right? And that's definitely a situation where, yes, of course, a personality makes sense for that. But there's a lot of applications where a personality isn't necessarily something that makes sense. And the example I use is this: when you go to the bank, right, in person to make a transaction, and how many of us still do that, right? But there are times when inevitably you have to go into the bank to complete some business. When you go in there, you get to the teller. Does the teller say, "Hi, I'm Jill. I'm going to be your teller today, and I'm going to help you with this, this, and this"? No. You get in there, you tell the teller what you want to do, you conduct your business and leave. Do you remember the teller's name? No. Was it really important? Not really. Did you get your business done? That's what's important.
Interesting.
Hmm.
There is instances where it has been a bit of fun, but you're right. It does
Oh,
need to
yeah.
be the right kind of use case. I know that Domino's had an Alexa skill a while back,
Hmm.
and it had, I can't remember the actual skill was rubbish. I have to say, because you couldn't make an order. You could only order from what was in your favorites basket, which meant that you
Hmm.
had to go to the website, assemble a favorites bundle, and then
Hmm.
once you had that assembled, you could order it on Alexa. So it was all a bit kind of like, backwards. But anyway, the personality of the assistant there was quite good, because it was doing little gags and stuff like that.
Hmm.
If it couldn't check you out or whatever, or if it like made an issue or whatever like that, it would say something like, fiery jalapeno, I've made a mistake or whatever,
Hmm.
and it would be a little bit fun. But that was very much a purposeful experiential activity.
Sure.
It wasn't necessarily, yes, you might have been trying to order the pizza, but given that you could only order a pizza from your favorites box,
Hmm.
not many people could actually order a pizza. So it
Hmm.
was more like a gimmicky experience rather than something that was there to help you get a job done, so to speak.
Hmm.
And so I think you're probably right that most of the time it's more transactional. The user wants to get something done, and
Yeah.
other fluff might kind of get in the way a little bit. But how do you approach sort of dialogue design, and I suppose having a consistent language and such, if the project requires more than one copywriter or more than one dialogue designer,
Hmm.
or maybe there's plans in future to bring somebody else on board, like how do you sort of communicate to that person how you should be crafting dialogue for this thing?
I keep very copious notes. I keep a lot of notes. And first of all, brand guidelines, right? If the brand you're working with, if the business you're working with has brand guidelines, then number one, that's a reference material that is priceless, that is going to help you keep the conversation consistent, right? Any notes I have about, oh, the voice should be, I mean, if it's insurance, if it's banking, if it's something that requires some level of gravitas of the VA, then definitely keep notes on, the type of voice they want to use, or the voice settings, right? You can set the voice settings so that you have, it's this voice personality, it's this pitch, it's this delivery.
Hmm.
Have all that in a shared resource that anyone can access, so that when I hand over a project, they have all of that legacy material. and as a writer, not just of VAs, but of stories and other things, you know, I don't necessarily keep a full dossier on every character I write for. It's in there. I understand their voice, and yeah, passing that along to somebody else is important. And usually, when you read some scripting somebody's put out for a VA, you can get a feel pretty quickly. Oh, this is kind of a formal application. They say thank you instead of thanks. They don't use contractions when they speak. If you look at the material that's there, you can usually continue the voice design without a lot of extra stuff thrown in.
It's interesting because I remember seeing um, an interview with Ricky Gervais
Hmm.
at one point, and bear with this this story. I remember seeing an interview from Ricky Gervais at one point, and he was answering a question which was almost like a criticism of, every time you're in a film, you play the same kind of character. Why
Hmm.
is that? And he was saying, well, that's because that's kind of who I am. Just
Hmm.
because the mannerisms that I have are kind of similar, it
Hmm.
doesn't mean that that's a wrong thing to do. It's
Hmm.
just that that's who I am, and this part that I'm playing is that kind of thing. I'm
Hmm.
not going to change everything about myself for the sake of it. It's kind of like, he is a consistent person, I suppose, and that's what you get when you cast him. And so the more I kind of work on these things, especially in certain industries and certain domains. I've been using a lot recently. I don't know if you've seen the Conversations with Things book from Rebecca Evanhoe and Diana Deeble. There's a really great bit about personas and personalities in there. And it's not about, this is Jill or that's Steve and they're from Connecticut and the dad's a doctor and, they've got a 4-year-old dog and a 2 year
Yeah.
old son and, the favorite color's blue. It's like, it's more about what is the goal that the user's trying to achieve,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then what factors are going to constitute success for this goal. Oh, well, it needs to be
Hmm.
quick, or it needs to be efficient, or it needs to be whatever, whatever, whatever.
Hmm.
And then there's a few scales that they use, which is like, what does the tone need to be? Like overexcited and happy, or like a bit more down to earth? Is it
Hmm.
warm? Is it cool? Like, and things like that, And then like, there's a really good bit about working out how should the assistant respond if it's challenged to something. How
Hmm.
should it respond if it's being corrected, or how should it correct a person? And
Right.
so, I mean, it's really good. But what I've noticed in certain domains is that when you do this and you do the personality design with a team of people who are ultimately going to have ownership over this assistant,
Hmm.
there are very clear patterns that emerge. Nobody wants it to be called Steve or
Yeah.
Trudy, but they want it to be humanized a bit. They don't want it to sound too robotic. They want it to still be a bit humanistic. All the goals are kind of the same. The user just wants to get something done, and they want it to be
Hmm.
quick and speedy and not overzealous or over the top.
Hmm.
They don't want it to be too cold and standoffish, but they want it to be kind of approachable and warm sounding.
Hmm.
They don't want to be rude when they correct people. And so there's all of these patterns that emerge that I reckon now, and I'm sure you may feel the same. I'd be interested to get your thoughts. I reckon now that a certain brand could come to me and say, we want to create a persona, and I'd be able to just go to that
Yeah.
template and do one for them, and that would be the end result that they would
Yeah.
do if they did it themselves. So I'm wondering if you can, is there a place where all of this stuff converges to a place where actually most assistants require a very similar kind of persona, if you want to give it that label?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I agree with everything you just said, right? Like I said, changing the tone based on the business, right? And the user needs don't change a lot, right? The user needs, they might need more guidance in a VA. I mean, depending, and a lot of it depends on the application, right? If I'm writing something, and I think I used this example before, if I'm writing something for, let's say, AARP, the American Association of Retired People, how I write prompts is going to be a little bit different than if I'm writing for a sporting goods company, right?
Mm,
I think more about the users and what they need and who that user population is. To me, that is a much more useful metric than any persona that anybody comes up with. To me, it's who are the users? How are they using this? What do they want to do? What are their needs? What do they need? And how do I give that to them? Ultimately, voice design, it's writing for the needs of the users and writing for the needs of the machines, and that's where they meet in the middle. Does
very
that
good.
answer your question?
It does, yeah, definitely,
Okay.
definitely. You mentioned a minute ago that you've done, you do other writing aside
Mm-hmm.
from, conversation design and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. I
Mm-hmm.
know that you have, a background in psychology and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. I'm wondering whether you can shed a bit of light on because what we're doing when creating digital assistants is you are creating some degree of
A
whether you
character.
want to call it character, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So you and that character is having for some companies, lots and lots and lots of conversations with lots
Mm-hmm.
of different people. So
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of opportunity for something to either go wrong or lots
Mm-hmm.
of opportunities for, negative experiences to occur.
Mm-hmm.
Yet you can use potentially psychology when you craft prompts and when you create dialogue in order to make that experience a little bit more. I don't want to say human-like. That's probably the wrong way of saying it, but a bit more user-friendly.
Yeah.
I wonder whether
Functional.
you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
wonder if you can share a little bit on your thoughts of where psychology and conversation design kind of meet.
Oh, everywhere. I mean, they made everywhere. Even things such as in human to human conversation, there are a lot of unwritten rules, right? You and I can see each other. I see you nodding your head just now, right? I see that you're paying attention, you're understanding what I'm saying. When you just asked me the question, you asked the question, then you paused. I knew it was my turn. Okay, those visual cues do not exist in voice design with a voice assistant or on the phone. So turn taking issues can become a problem. Knowing when to build in those pauses, how to build in those pauses, whether or not you should make a prompt bargeable.
Mm,
Okay, and if there's a prompt and you are able to say what you want in the middle of it, that means it's bargeable. If it makes you listen to the whole thing, it means it's not bargeable. There are certain prompts that you just shouldn't make bargeable. There are instructions users have to hear. The rule of primacy and recency in a list, right? If you're giving a listener a list of things and it's too long, they're only going to remember the first one and the last one. They're not going to remember the middle ones. That's why you want to keep your lists between 3 and 5. I've seen some schools of thought that say only 3, and I would say that depends on how you're presenting the list, right? Cognitive load. That's another one. Cognitive load, how many things a person can remember. Again, that goes back to the listing thing. Um, you know, People can only remember a certain amount of things. If you overload them with information, they're not going to remember what you've told them. They might not remember what they need to say. There's a lot of things that come into play when you're designing conversations that apply to psychology and also how you make users feel. I don't know if you've ever used a voice assistant where, you know, it's made you feel, dumb or a failure because maybe you didn't know what to say because it wasn't giving you clear guidance. You know, Users walk away from these things angry. Who are they going to be mad at? Are they going to be mad at the bot persona or are they going to be mad at the company for creating a bad experience? I go back to the Domino's example that you just gave, right? How cool would that have been if besides this wonderful spicy personality that this thing had, if it would have been able to take your order and give you a pizza? How much better that would have gone for
mm,
the company had they been able to design this application, this skill that would have been able to do more for their users. That people would have been raving about it. And that's really the thing, right? There's a company locally, it's a national company that actually has a voice bot that goes by a name, and the first thing people say to me when they find out what I do is, "Oh, have you talked to named bot?" It's terrible. At least they can use that name to reference how bad this bot is. But I know that was not the intention of the designers, right? I know that wasn't the intention of the company, but here we are.
yeah. There's a lot of that, and it's we've been having a lot of conversations lately. I know this is a famous line from, well, famous in my head anyway. How famous it is with everyone, I don't know. But David Lowe, ex BBC, ex Skyscanner, he always says that you build your first bot twice. Because the first time you build it, because you're learning, you've never done it before, you make
Hmm.
so many mistakes that you end up building it again. And obviously, as you've just said, it's the old kind of like agile and lean
Yeah.
principles, isn't it? Which is that everybody did the best they can at the time with the knowledge and resources that they had available to them.
Hmm.
And so when somebody launches a chatbot or a virtual assistant or a voice assistant or whatever that is lacking in some way, shape, or form, it's not that they've done it on purpose. but there is things that either aren't done or done incorrectly that leads to a poor experience. I'm wondering if you can share a bit in your experience, what are some of those fundamentals that people get wrong sometimes that can lead to negative customer experiences, either if it's your first time doing something or something like that. What are those kind of like the core things you've noticed that people get wrong when they begin trying to do this?
The gotchas, right? The
Yeah,
gotchas.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
The first one is having an expectation of what the bot can do that's not realistic. Okay, let's be honest about what bots can do right now in this space, right? And I know this is changing and this is evolving, but typically bots do best with simple repetitive tasks. Okay, so starting out with a use case that is trying to get its arms around too many things can be a pitfall, right? It can be a huge pitfall.
Mm,
Also, one of the things here's how I can spot an amateur, okay? How they're asking questions, how they're asking user questions, how they're phrasing them. Because why I've made all those mistakes, okay? I've made all those mistakes. And for example, one of them was a company that you can wire money globally. And I was doing a redesign for them. And the question I asked, are you calling to send or receive money? And the answer users were saying, I was expecting send or receive. They were saying
mm,
yes. Didn't occur to me. Whereas if I rephrase it, which are you calling to do? Send money or pick up money, right?
mm,
It's the same question, right? It's just phrased in such a way that the user knows that the response is going to be either send or pick up money. That's one. Gosh, there's so many. Menus that are structured, menus that are front loaded. I don't know if you know what front loading is, but for billing, balance, or to make a deposit, say deposit. Right? Right now, the cognitive load on that's four things. You
mm.
think it's only one because they say deposit or whatever, right? But you've just packed four things on there, so now they have to try and I have to say this for this thing, and that's just the first option. Even if they have three options and they have three things, that's nine. That's nine things. It's already past the 5 point, right? So how menus are structured, um, you know, uh, and then, things like to speak to an agent, say agent, or there was one I encountered the other day where the phrasing was like, well, why don't you just say speak to an agent? Why is it if it's this or this, say agent?
Mm.
You know?
Teaching people how to speak.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. And that's another thing. And I use this comparison quite frequently when I'm talking to people who are learning the art, is that, you have to teach these bots to talk. You have to teach the bots to speak, much like you teach a baby to speak, right? You have to train AI, human in the loop AI, right? You have to train it to speak. And when you're presenting a bot to users, they have to know what to say, right? You
Mm,
have to be very clear with what they can say if it's structured in a very linear way.
yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people who are beginning with either no formal training or experience will make a lot of their mistakes,
Hmm.
you know, really without thinking about it and without
Hmm.
knowing, obviously.
Hmm.
Um, but then as you get a bit more experienced, like for example, you've been doing this for quite a while.
Hmm.
You're experienced. You know offhand these principles. That's how
Hmm.
embedded they are in your kind of like psyche and experience. What are some of the challenges that someone in your shoes, an experienced conversation designer, would face today?
Everybody thinks this job is really easy until they have to do it. Right? It's just words on paper. It's just getting people to do this, but you don't realize that human behavior. You can have the best designed VA on the planet, and people are always going to do things that you don't expect. Users are always going to do things that you don't expect. I think there's a perception, and I've encountered this a lot, where, well, people who are designing stuff for IVRs, they don't know anything about modern voice design. Well, hey, look, a lot of the same rules apply here. A lot of the same rules apply. A lot of the examples I just gave you, how you ask a question, it's still important. it's still relevant and it still impacts your bot's performance.
Mm, interesting. What are some of the you mentioned there when if you mentioned to somebody that you design experiences like that named bot for that, I think it was financial services company you mentioned. Um, what are some of the misconceptions that people have about that role, or maybe let's put it as you're talking to either a potential client or a new client and you're having some kind of like kick-off engagement or whatever. What are some of the misconceptions that people bring into those conversations, either about conversation design or about conversational AI generally?
Well, I'm gonna go with your first question. So usually when I meet somebody, they ask me what I do. I just say I'm in software design. I don't want to tell them what I do because inevitably it's like, oh yeah, you know those voice bots where you call the bank and yeah, I design those. Oh, I hate those.
Yeah.
Those are terrible. And the challenge I feel is that there are so many bad ones out there that people seem to think that the only experience they're going to get is a bad one.
Mm,
Power users, they're going to press zero, they're going to say operator, they're going to scream a swear word or whatever they do to get out of it, right? And when I meet with a new client, I listen as much as I can. I do research before I even meet them to kind of get an idea of what the business is about, what their potential pain points might be. I'll go read Yelp reviews
mm,
of the business because that gives me some insight into maybe some customer pain points that we can talk about and address. And I think it goes back to what I said earlier about having setting realistic expectations for what your VA can do,
mm,
right? I'm working with a company right now that's a car parts company, and they're very risk averse. I mean, I'm familiar with them because when I was married to a stock car driver, we get their catalogs this thick at the house, right? And so I knew who they were, and they're very risk averse. They've done business the same way for the last 50 years. And they wanted to kind of dip their toe into the pool of VA. And so we talked, we came up with a use case. We presented this use case, we got it up and running. They're seeing the value, which is fabulous. I mean, to me, half the challenge of working with clients is getting those clients who are naturally curious, who are on board with recommendations, and who are willing to take those recommendations and then, step out of their comfort zone a little more, try new things. And that's the challenge. The challenge is getting them to A, listen to recommendations,
mm,
B, roll it out, look at the data, and be agile. Like you said, make changes as we see them come along because inevitably users are going to do things we don't expect.
mm. You mentioned there that people typically say when you say if you were to tell someone that you designed those voice experiences for call centers that they'll say, oh, they're a load of rubbish. And I've had them conversations. I even a few years ago when the predominant thing we were doing was designing Alexa skills,
Hmm.
and you'd say, oh, we designed things for Alexa and Google Assistant and stuff, and it was like, oh, but Alexa never understands what I say. It's a load of rubbish. So it's like there's this for some people there's this kind of like I would say misconception of the capabilities of
Hmm.
these voice assistants, because if it's designed well and it's
Hmm.
built well, then it should do the job it's supposed to do. It's not going to do everything. So
Hmm.
maybe I think that these assistants, even Siri and stuff, when they were first released, were really over promising
Hmm.
what the theory is. Um, but most of them that are designed well can work well. But there is still a big historic footprint of really poor experiences.
Yeah.
Those ones you were alluding to earlier. For checking, say checking. For credit cards, say
Yeah.
credit cards.
Yeah.
One, you're teaching people how to speak. Two, you're giving people huge amounts of information which they
Hmm.
can't kind of comprehend at any one time.
Hmm.
And I know we've kind of spoke about like gotchas and stuff like that, but it's still maybe it's in the IVR space. There is historic legacy stuff there
Hmm.
that isn't a great experience.
Hmm.
What do you think are some of the ingredients that lead or led to those experiences being particularly poor? And is there anything in that that we can learn for creating ones today using better technology, presumably?
Well, when I started doing this, there weren't a lot of companies even producing IVRs, right? And I worked for one of the larger companies. And when I started working there, I was just sort of turned loose with minimal training,
Mm.
right? So what's going to happen? I'm going to design crap. I mean, in spite of my best efforts, without structure and training, I'm going to design crap. Um, and so, yeah, that's how it started. That's how they started with getting a bad reputation. Um, but now we have these wonderful back-end speech recognition systems that are a lot better at recognizing. They're a lot more flexible. They don't require the same amount of hand-holding. You don't necessarily need a speech scientist now because you have these pre-built speech engines that don't require that. But back when we had to tune those things, it was expensive, right? It took a lot of time because the utterances had to be tagged, categorized, classified, and then these reports. I mean, it would take 6 months, right?
Mm.
Whereas now with the tools I have, I can go in and I can see what's being misrecognized, right? Or maybe there's a pronunciation that a user is using that's not common, and I can go in and I can create custom vocabularies. I can create new intents with utterances in real time, which wasn't possible before. So, the VAs we're producing now, there's so much more, there's so many different tools behind the hood that you can get your hands dirty. And that can also be a double-edged sword, right? If you don't know what you're doing, you can really mess things up. But, it's gotten a lot more democratized. It's gotten a lot more, data in real time that you can respond to more quickly to make things better. Does that answer
Mm.
your question?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So the technology is definitely improved,
Hmm.
without a shadow of a doubt. The technology that's available now, even compared to 5 years ago,
Oh,
is
yeah.
incredible. I wonder whether, obviously, some people have been, as you have, and I remember we've spoken to, like Jonathan Bloom, ex Nuance, now currently at Google, and Daniel Paget of the same kind of like crop of folks that were like early Nuance kind of like voice
Hmm.
designers, and working on effective things, in the 90s and stuff like that. So the technology was obviously limiting,
Hmm.
but crafting it right, designing it right means that
Hmm.
you can create a decent experience.
Hmm.
Now that the technology has gotten a lot better, that obviously enables the things that you've just mentioned there. You can iterate things a lot faster, you
Hmm.
can do things a bit more sophisticated. What has changed in terms of the conversation design practice since that time? Because things, good things were still happening
Yeah.
then. There was still a lot of the stuff that you'll read in the books, Kathy Pearl's book, for
Hmm.
example. A lot of the stuff in that is practices and principles that go back, 90s, 80s, and so on. So it's like
Hmm.
a lot of this. I know it's a new trend now, conversation design, and it's
Hmm.
kind of like becoming a really growing practice and an emerging role for a lot of people,
Hmm.
and career choice for a lot of people. Um, but a lot of the principles were still around a while back. So I'm wondering if you can kind of shed a bit of light in your experience of what do you think's kind of changed and developed as far as conversation design processes, practices, tactics, things like that.
Well, again, the democratization of the tools, right? Before you had to have an IVR developer. Right now, I know Talkdesk has their own proprietary design tool. So, and it's codeless, basically. It's drag and drop, which is wonderful. But you get a lot of people who really don't know what they're doing. But um, one of the basic things is scripted out sample calls. I mean, that's such an easy one. Write it out. Write out like the conversation like you think it's going to happen. Test it out with somebody that you know. I always say my mom is my best beta tester, right? My mom is how old am I? My mom's 74. Okay. So, if I'm working on anything with her, I'll get her on the phone and I'll run it with her because she's great because she'll say, I don't understand that, right?
Mm,
So, I mean, the basic principles are keep it short and sweet, right? Keep your structure out what you want your users to say in such a way that they understand it. Give them some examples. Vary up those examples from, an initial to a retry or a repair flow, as they're called. Um, there's just basic writing principles that don't change.
mm, mm. What is your kind of process? Do you begin with writing and sample dialogues? Do you do something before that? What comes after that? Like, I wonder if you can share a little bit of light on, what is your process? If you were to start from the beginning of a project, what's your kind of role and remit in that project, and what's the process for you look
Okay.
like?
All right. So, yeah, it kind of depends. So sometimes I'm a very visual thinker. So, first I'll come up with use cases with the client, definitely talk to the client, get their input, um, and then sketch it out. I have a dry erase marker on my window. I think my neighbors think I'm insane because I'm always jotting boxes and arrows down on my window because it helps me think it out. Like, okay, think about what the flow is. Think about where we've got integrations. Where are we going to get data from? What happens? And I do when I do that initial step, yeah, it's kind of high level, but I also do some detail stuff because I want to know, okay, where might there be a delay, right? Because
Mm,
we're doing a back end lookup, right? What are the possible returns? What is it a null? Is there an error? Let's say it's the happy path and we get something, and then I map out the journey that way, just so I can visualize the flow and how all the parts work together. And then I'll go and do some samples, right? Script out
mhm,
how I think this might work. Um, and then, depending on where we are in the requirements phase. Sometimes I'm doing this in the requirements phase because the clients are not really sure what they want. So then
mhm,
I'll go back to them and I'll share the flow with them and their developer team and say, okay, here's what I think is going on. Is this yes? Is this no? And we'll walk through it that way, and then we'll walk through some samples. And if we get buy-in, then I'll go and do the detailed flow, and either build it out myself on the tool or hand it over to one of my team members who then builds it out with the tool.
mm.
and
Interesting.
then and then creating test scripts, right? Creating test scripts, making sure that we've accounted for all of the responses, um, and testing it out, making sure it works.
Mm. What's your thoughts on that kind of happy path? So a lot of the methodology and the kind of like I suppose the standard process at the moment is to do that kind of happy path
Hmm.
first. I've always found personally I can't help sometimes get a bit carried away. So at one point, when you recognize that a user might say one thing, my brain just goes crazy. It's like, well, I could say this, they might say that, they might say the other, they might say that, and then what happens if they don't say this and that? So I always end up, whether it's a fault of mine or not, I always end up going a bit deeper than a happy
Hmm.
path, kind of pretty quick because anything can happen at any point, more or less. I don't know what your thoughts are on. Do you start with a happy path and then do iterations, or do you go pretty deep pretty quick?
I go pretty deep pretty quick because I'm a firm believer in that you have to provide your users a way to recover. Like, not everybody is going to go down the happy path. Things happen, dogs bark, kids scream. I'm distracted by my kid throwing pizza on the wall, so I miss a prompt, right? I mean,
I
and
know the
and
feeling.
I'm always, yeah, yeah, that's right. Um, yeah, I'm always, I think we do a disservice if we're only hyper focused on that happy path, because users mistakes are going to happen, and we have to give them the opportunity to be able to recover from that and return to the flow, or get them out of the flow if they can't recover.
Mm,
And I'm like you. I mean, yeah, I kind of design for the happy path, but like I said, when I'm looking at integrations, when I'm looking at what happens if they don't say this, do we have a counter there? What happens? We have to have a counter. How are we going to phrase the reprompt? Are we going to apologize? And that's a whole show. That's a whole
mm,
other show, Kane, about whether or not you should have your VA apologize. But, you know, um, all of that stuff goes into it. And I'm with you. I don't just design I can't just design the happy path. I'm like you. I can't, I have to design the other parts too, because it's holistic. It's a holistic entity,
mm.
right? You take one piece out, you're going to break it. And that's another thing that drives me bananas is, oh, I just want to change this prompt. Well, what prompt comes before then? I don't know. What comes after it? I don't know. Well, we should probably look at that before we
Yeah.
make a decision on this and how we're going to do this, because it all fits together. It all works together.
That's one of the values I think of having those low code kind of interfaces because
Hmm.
before, as I said, building Alexa skills and stuff like that without a tool to do it with, it was all code. So it's basically an intent comes in, and
Hmm.
every intent more or less is a completely fresh intent. You need to build basically a state machine that tries to realize what was the last prompt, then what
Hmm.
was the next one, and it ends up being a complete web and it's a total mess. Like,
Hmm.
um, But yeah, it's interesting you're saying there about going deeper quicker, because then those recovery. I can't remember who it was that said this. Now it might be Jonathan Bloom, which is something like conversations are actually made in those recovery moments,
Mm-hmm.
because anyone can get from beginning to end of a happy path. That's not a problem. Anyone can design a
Right.
happy path, really, providing the people say what you expect them to say. It's all
Right.
rosy. But where actually made, where the designers, I suppose, make the money, and where the assistant finds its success for the business is in dealing with the things that are not on the happy path, which is
Mm-hmm.
most of the conversation most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's funny that auto parts company that they were a lot of their customers will say, "Do what now? Do
Yeah,
what now?" And they mean repeat. So we've added that
yeah.
as a repeat recognition, right? So that we repeat something. But yeah, the no conversation is perfect, right? And if I don't understand you, I can say I'm sorry, what? Or can you repeat that? Or just something. But
Mm,
context is another thing that you were just referring to with Alexa skills. The context of the intent. What is it mapping to? What was said before? It's vital.
mm. Important question then: should your voice assistant or virtual assistant apologize?
I think yes. That's
Okay.
just because if I make a mistake, I'm going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I don't have a problem with a VA saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get that," or "Oh, my mistake. Let's try that again."
Mm,
Just something to like, "Oh, yeah, all right, let's try it again." And yeah, I don't have a problem. I'm kind of stymied by the thought that it should never apologize because, would you apologize?
yeah. It's that's the thing that's made the mistake, isn't it? Necessarily,
Yeah,
there's no
yeah,
mistake in conversation, is there? And so if the
right.
bot doesn't
And
understand something,
right. And you never put the onus, you never put the onus back on the, "Oh, well, I didn't hear you." You know what I mean? It that
yeah.
gets annoying really fast. Like, I said this. Why did you not hear me?
Yeah. So in that process, when you're kind of like starting to go from, I suppose the conceptual design into more of the sort of like developer
Hmm.
development kind of phase where you're actually putting something together that can be tested, so to
Hmm.
speak, in the tool.
Hmm.
Um, I'm wondering whether who you can talk us through kind of like who does what in that phase. Like in your team, do the designers also do things like, NLU training and training data and populating those models and stuff like that, testing those models, or is there a handover to a developer? I'm wondering whether you can kind of talk us through what happens a bit further down the line.
No, well, I mean, my team is pretty much involved from start to finish, and creating intents and training intents, and testing. My husband was a tester, and he said never have developers test your stuff, right? Um, you know, or never have developers test their own stuff.
Yeah.
So, I may develop it, I may come up with the test scripts and then hand it over to the rest of my team who doesn't, who might not have been involved in the initial go round, right? And hand it to them and have them test because they can't know everything, right?
Mm,
I want them to know what the basic flow is, but I also want them to be able to find the gotchas because that makes my design bulletproof. The better the testing, the better the design, right?
mm,
The better the testing, the better the launch, I should say, not the
yeah.
design. Because they're going to find things. I mean, the intention of a tester is to break it.
Mm,
So I always tell the team to break it.
mm. Yeah. And you need a second set of eyes, don't you? You need some objectivity and someone who is completely fresh, because
Second,
that's like
third,
a
fourth.
user.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Second, third, fourth pair of eyes. Yeah. The more the merrier as far as testing is concerned, in my opinion.
Mm,
Because they're going to find things that you didn't plan on. They're going to do
yeah.
things you don't expect, which is what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
How do
and then sorry, go
so,
ahead.
no, no, go on, go on.
No, and then after that we'll hand it over to the user for testing or the business for testing for user UAT, user
Yeah.
acceptance testing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I was kind of getting at. So
Hmm.
your testing, is that um is it kind of like there it is, go and play with it? Is it kind of like here's a scenario that
Hmm.
we need to cater for, so I'll
Hmm.
give you a bit of information, and
Hmm.
how do you go about doing the testing?
Just like you said with the scenario, like, you're calling to check on this benefit.
Mm,
Here's your member ID. Any numbers or any data that they need to give the system, I'll give it to them.
Mm.
so that they can call and do this. And, and I have them keep very good notes about, well, when we got here, I said this and it failed.
Mm.
So it's basically usually like an Excel grid with notes in it that we can go back and pour over and address each thing point by point.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And then when you've gone through that kind of phase and you are getting something into production, obviously the interesting thing about conversation design I find is that you're only ever designing one half of the experience. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? Because the user is
Yeah.
the one who's the other half, and you don't reach the users until you do that testing, or then until you go live, kind of thing. And so, what is there any things? I mean, there's things that people will measure when they go live with a chatbot, but different people want different things, don't they? The
Yeah.
business kind of wants to know, how is this doing the job it's supposed to be doing?
Right.
The developers might want to know, is there any issue or API calls? Is there any bugs happening? Some AI kind of optimizers might want to know, is the language model got integrity? But I'm just wondering whether is all of this stuff that you want to measure as from the design perspective, or is there any things in particular that you're looking for as measures of success from a designer's point of view?
Well, I always try when I'm working with a new client to come up with those KPIs, those key performance indicators at the beginning, so that we're all honest. Keeps us all honest. All right,
Mm,
what are we doing? What's the goal here? What's the measure of success? Because I think that's vital, right? You need to know, okay, is my success metric containment? Is my success metric self-service rates? Is it saving agent time by collecting information in the virtual assistant? Right? So
mm,
having those metrics ahead of time will help keep everybody honest and on the same page and show where the needle needs to move if it's not moving, or if it has been moving, how far has it moved, right? Um, I like being involved from beginning to end because on every project, Kane, I learn something new.
mm,
And like you said, yeah, I'm designing for half of the conversation. Yeah, I'm kind of getting into the user headspace and trying to design their bit too. But for me, the fun really happens is really when the users are using it, right? Not everybody can do, usability testing before something goes live. Okay, so when we're launching a VA, I'll usually recommend that the company launch it at like 3%. Let's launch it at 3% of traffic. Let's see what's happening. Let's see what the users are doing. Are we right? Are they doing something we don't expect? If they are doing something we don't expect, we have that opportunity to be agile and adapt and make changes or add training phrases to our intent models.
mm.
Because now we're getting real world data. And to me, that's where the rubber meets the road. We design in theory. Getting this thing out there in the wild, that is practice. That's where we learn the most.
What's your thoughts on uh, training data? So we've had lots of different conversations about this, and we've used different methods ourselves. So one train of thought is that you use customer utterances as they are, and you put that into your model.
Mhm.
Another train of thought is that you kind of do some massaging to strip away maybe some irrelevant stuff so that you focus in on what you're left with is the essence of what was said, and you put that into your model.
Mhm.
You can hypothesize as well and just make assumptions and put things in there that you think might be relevant and stuff like that. Like lots of different ways to go about that kind of training. How do you approach that once something is live? Are you looking for what's said, and if an intent hasn't been matched but it should have been, you just take it verbatim and throw it into the model? Do you do any kind of massaging? Like, what's your kind of general approach to?
Yeah, it's the second one where we'll actually look and massage it a little bit, take out the chaff as I call it, right?
Mm,
Take out the ums and the uhs and get to the essential nature, distill it down to its essential nature, and use that as a training phrase. Um, Ultimately with every project, it would be lovely if the first thing we did was utterance capture, right?
mm,
If we launched something and we said, hey, how may I help you? And we got all those user utterances, and then we took that and we figured out, okay, these are your top intents. Here's what they said to get there. Here's what we'll build around and use that. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen.
mm,
But you know, you when you're designing a VA, a lot of times you are kind of speculating as to what people will say. And it is
mm,
always best to use in the wild, natural, phrases, but
Mhm.
sometimes we don't have that option and we speculate, and then from that speculation then we improve, right?
Mhm. What are some of the other? You touched on something there, which is a real challenge for a lot of businesses trying to do this, which is they don't have training data, they don't have a place
Mm-hmm.
to start, they don't
Mm-hmm.
have a live chat or call recordings or transcripts or any of those things. Um, what are some of the? And that's obviously a challenge, but I think you've explained how you can get around that. You can make some assumptions. You can
Mm-hmm.
use previous experience of similar kind of use cases. You can put things live to a small amount of traffic. You can gather some data, analyze it, and improve the models and stuff. What are some of the other challenges that you've kind of come across in the past as it relates to on the business side? So, I mean, if all things were rosy, you can just design conversations, and everything's
Mm-hmm.
good. But
Mm-hmm.
the implementation in the business can sometimes come with some challenges. I wonder if there's other things you've observed which are challenging on that front and how you overcome those things.
You know, the biggest challenge is when I, when I go and I do all my homework, like I said, I go into a meeting, I have some ideas, and I obviously want as much data as, like Sherlock Holmes said, data, data, data. I can't make bricks without clay. I can speculate, but if I have data, then it's going to be way better because it's a real world thing, right? It's tangible. One of the things that I always tell my clients is, do you have a call center? Yeah. Do you have a disposition report? Yeah. Give that to me. Because your call center agents are talking to people all day long. They are your best resource. They are your frontline soldiers, right? This is who you need to talk to. If a caller is calling because the warranty is expired, ask your call center agents, what do they usually say when they get to you? It's another place where data can be mined, right? You don't think of it that way, but yes, they are. The call center agents are the most massive repository of customer data that you can possibly have. And if you've got a call center, then use it. That's where you can get a lot of the self-service use cases from. That's where that data can come from. Hey, what's the most repetitive task you do all day long? Oh, is it this? Okay, well, then that's a possible use case for the bot.
Yeah, that's really good. Um, we hear a lot about large language models and few shot training of those models where you don't really need to do a terrible amount of that data mining really
Hmm.
to spin up something that kind of works. And I've given talks in the past actually about the future of conversation design as we approach these kind of large language model technologies, certainly for more information based use cases, not
Hmm.
necessarily transaction getting things done sort of stuff. But I'm wondering whether you can shed some light on where you think conversation design is going. You've been doing this for quite some time, and given that people think that it's a new field, anybody with 5 years experience in this field
Yeah.
is being like experienced. So, and you mentioned you've seen trends come back around and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So, being where we are now, we know about the technology, as you mentioned. It's democratized access to this tooling a lot more. I think that the conversation design community is generally good now at sharing best practice and all
Hmm.
that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But then we've got things on the horizon like large language models and things like that. So I'm wondering if you were to, I don't know, if you did have a magic wand or a crystal ball or whatever, like what do you think some of the things are that are changing that might affect conversational AI production or conversation design in the next, 5 years or so?
Well, I never want to make these predictions because I'm always wrong. 10 years ago, if you had asked me, you think you're going to be doing this in 10 years? No, because it's going to be, I won't be needed anymore, right? Well, the opposite has happened. What I've seen that excites me the most is that with this explosion of virtual assistants, user expectations have changed, right? They expect more, which is great, which means we have to rise to the occasion, right? The fact that people have virtual assistants in their homes, they talk to them daily, they're on their phone, it has really changed how people interact with voice bots in general because they've been trained for it. Again, remember going back to when we were talking about you how to train your users, they're trained every day whether or not they realize it to use, I use Siri and I use Alexa, and it has really changed how I interact with voice systems. Like when my husband calls, he launches into this long thing, and I'm like, dude, no, you got to say this. You know, it's like just 3 words. Get there. Trust me on this. The user expectations are going to increase. The bot sophistication is going to increase. And, I, again, and I know I've said this and I'm going to be wrong, but I would be really surprised if conversation designers are going to be a thing in 5 years because these systems are going to be so sophisticated that I don't know that I will even be needed.
Mm. I tend to think I'm more concur with your initial kind of observation, which was that you thought that a while back, and it turns out that actually it's needed more than ever. And
Hmm.
the reality is, if you look at some of the large language models, well, we saw last week BlenderBot went off the rails because you can't just leave it there.
Yeah,
The Microsoft example from a few years ago that went off the rails. Whenever you put them in the wild, they go off the rails, and
that's
my
true. That is
yeah,
true.
they do.
Yeah.
And my thoughts are that like these large language models, they're built on billions of parameters, and
Yeah.
the engineers that build them, which again, everyone does the best they can at the time with the resources and knowledge that they have, but the way that they're built is that nobody really understands them. And so
Hmm.
if it gets something wrong, getting back into that model to train a large language model,
To fix it.
how do you find which parameters out of the billions are the ones that have gotten things slightly wrong?
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to do. And so, and also, a lot of businesses, the value for a lot of businesses is in doing things that deliver value. Like
Hmm.
answering a question, yes, it's kind of valuable. It stops someone from calling your call center, but it doesn't let a user get something done, does it? Booking, if you're working with a type list, booking an appointment to check your car in to get some new tires, that's
Hmm.
valuable because that's revenue for the business. It's a
Hmm.
job done for the customer, and that requires intents, and it requires gathering data and entities and slot filling and all those kind of things that are part of the current technology stack. So if anything, I actually think that the next 5 years, with more companies wanting to do more with conversational I think we're just getting started in the conversation design sort of game, for want of a better word.
I much like your theory better.
Yeah, I did have those thoughts. Those thoughts have come through my head before, which is that large language models are going to take over, and a conversation designer's job is basically going to mainly be about identifying content, where we're going to
Hmm.
get content from, how are we going to create it and format it in such a way that a large language model can use it and synthesize it properly and summarize it properly and all that kind of stuff. How are we going to
Hmm.
measure the performance of this stuff to make sure that we're not giving people rubbish and that it is getting better over time. And that was my initial thinking. But the more I was thinking about it, I was thinking there's hundreds of thousands, millions, billions, or however many companies there are in the world,
Yeah.
and every single one of them can use conversational AI, every
Hmm.
single one of them, in
Hmm.
some way, shape, or form. And a
Hmm.
large language model is not going to be fit for every single purpose at all. It's in fact, it's probably going to be only confined to content retrieval, um, which means there's huge, huge, huge opportunities ahead still.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and we didn't even get into bias, right? We didn't get
Mm,
into, the bias of the models. I mean, that's a whole other topic that, is another hour-long conversation, but it's something that is people are becoming more and more aware of, and you know, that's why one of the other ones went off the rail
yeah.
because of the bias. So,
Yeah, it is.
yeah.
It is. It's very, yeah, it's very real. I think it was Mark Bernstein from Balto, which was we were talking about on a previous podcast, and he was saying that it's one of the most fundamental questions of our time, which is the ethical use of AI.
Hmm.
Bias being one issue related to that, but the other one being giving AI autonomy to be able to make decisions, or even we were talking about psychology earlier on, programming an AI with patterns that, let's say, for example, you could design a really successful conversation that is completely foolproof, that gets 90% of the people through it, regardless of whether they want to get through it or not, right? You
Okay.
kind of, you could potentially, using psychology, you could create a conversation that could either mislead, dupe people,
Hmm.
uh, uh, convince people to get through a conversation and commit to something without them really wanting to do it. And so it's kind of like, yeah, it is one of the biggest questions that we have at the moment is how do we make sure that we do things ethically and
Mhm.
things that are, accessible for everybody, so that there's a level playing field, but at the same time, so that it doesn't go off the rails and it doesn't turn into, blender bot or whatever. It's mad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a college course there. That's a
Yeah.
dissertation.
I know.
Get busy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's do it. Let's do it. Cool. Well, I think, yeah, rather than go down that particular rabbit hole, because we will be here all week, I think, on that one. It's definitely been a really, really interesting conversation. I've learned a hell of a lot here, and thanks so much, Dawn, for joining us. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it, Kane. I'd love to come back sometime if something comes
Definitely,
up.
definitely, definitely. Three times you get the VUX World hat trick. I don't have any with me
Oh,
right now.
nice.
I do actually.
Excellent.
Hold on. Here we go. The hat
Oh,
trick
nice.
for three appearances. I owe a couple of people some caps actually. I do need to
Love
get
it.
some in the post. So yeah, more than welcome back whenever you can, Don. And I
Okay.
will put the links. I know there's some good assets that Talkdesk has. Designing customer conversations, best practices. There's a
Mhm.
fantastic paper on that, which I'll put in the show notes. How to avoid the uncanny valley in conversation design is also an epic one. I'll put that in the show notes. And there's another one which is the future of AI, a future of voice AI, I think it might be called. I'll put that in there as well. I'm not sure if that one's out yet or if it's coming out.
Yeah,
I think it's
I
out
think
now.
it's coming out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll put all of those links in the show notes, and you can all download it there. And you can also go to voicesummit.ai to find out all about VUX World at Voice Summit 2022, presented by Core AI, walking you through the steps of what it takes to automate your customer experience in your contact center. A lot of these principles that you've covered today, Dawn, directly apply. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right. Thank you.
Cheers.